We're pleased to have with us Mr. David Brooks, a noted columnist and commentator. He's here as part of the Tulsa Business Forum and the Oklahoma City Management Briefing. So it's an honor to have you with us.
Pleasure. It's been a total pleasure to be in Tulsa.
Glad to have you here. A few questions. You recently wrote that you believe that there may be actually more political discrimination in the United States than racial discrimination. What do you mean by that, and why do you think that's true?
Yeah, it started, one of my students was working at a conservative think tank in Washington, and then he was applying to a bunch of jobs where it was mostly liberals who worked there, and he said, should I put that on my resume or will they discriminate against me? And I said, put it on, they'll be pleased that you worked in a think tank. But then I saw some studies that were done at Stanford and elsewhere by political scientists who they sent out 1,000 resumes with some had political notations and some had ethnic notations. And the Republicans all hired the Republicans, and the Democrats all, in the research, all hired the Democrats. And it was actually, the level of discrimination was actually greater than the level of discrimination depending on what the racial cues were. And so there's a whole series of research on this, that people really like people from their own party. Well, the one thing that scares me a little, and I think this is wrong values, but people are asked, would you mind it if your son or daughter married somebody from another party? And it used to be like in 1970s, 5% would mind. Now it's like 40 or 50% would mind. So people are much more hostile to people in the opposing party than they used to.
Do you think it's more along party lines or philosophical lines? You know, liberal, conservative, or Republican, Democrat? Which do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, one of the things that's happened is that well, this is my theory. We used to get our identities based on maybe our ethnicity. Maybe I grew up in a Polish neighborhood or an Italian neighborhood, and therefore that's how I define myself. I think the salience of those neighborhoods has grown less important, but party identification, people identify them more as parties. The other thing that's happened is that Republicans move into areas that are where Republicans live and Democrats move in where Democrats live. So people really are divided more just in how they live. And if you look at, say, the top 10 TV shows that Republicans watch and the top 10 TV shows that Democrats watch, the lists barely overlap. And so it's now become sad but true that you can tell a lot about a person's culture from what party label they give themselves.
What do you think is the reason we become more polarized along those lines in the country?
Yeah, I think there's a zillion reasons. Some of it is, again, this self-sorting. One of the perversities, and it's related to what we all do for a living, is education. That people who have college degrees and graduate degrees are much more polarized than people with high school degrees. People with more education vote straight party labels much more. They give themselves an ideology, whereas people with high school degrees don't give themselves an ideology. They go to it more candidate by candidate. And so perversely, one of the things that's fed all this is education. You'd think education would make you think more independently, but we're not doing a good enough job or something. I just know there's that correlation.
Well, I know there's brain research showing that we tend to seek out confirming evidence and disregard the disconfirming. So what can we do to fight our brain's tendency to work against us in that?
Yeah, I do think making extra effort to read stuff you disagree with, whether it's a magazine or a website you disagree with. But the big thing that won't help much is making sure you have friends. A lot of people just don't have friends that, like, all their friends are in one party. And making sure you have friends in the opposing party, and they're not such bad people, and then that will probably do more than any other amount of reading you can do.
Sort of humanize the other side.
Yeah, I have a dumb rule when I'm doing interviews. I interview politicians for a living, and if I speak to a Democrat in the morning, I try to speak to a Republican in the afternoon. I just try to do one-on-one, just to keep myself a little balanced. And the one thing you learn is they know nothing about each other. They're really strange creatures to each other.
So do you think the dysfunction in Washington at the national level is a product of ourselves or vice versa?
Yeah, I used to think it was in Washington that the country was sort of a middle-of-the-road country, but we had a screwed up set of elites. Now I'm more beginning to think it's the country, it's all the way down, partly because of those wedding things, partly also because the geographic sorting, which I mentioned, that people are moving in with each other. And so that it's much more a social problem than just an elite problem.
Shifting gears a little bit, if you were a small business owner in the United States, would you be optimistic, pessimistic?
I think I'd be pretty optimistic. First, we have a political problem in this country, and we have bad leadership, or the political system isn't working. But I think the business entrepreneurial system is working pretty well. I mean, there's some evidence that I'm sure you're aware of that the rate of small business formation is slowing and other things like that. But we're attracting great talent from around the world. The younger generation is very hardworking, very entrepreneurial. They believe in small business formation. And the innovation, there's just a lot of innovation happening. And then the final thing, we're in a bad mood as a country now. 20% think the country's on the right track, everyone else thinks we're on the wrong track. But if you compare our problems to the problems of decades past, in the 1970s we had stagflation, we had Watergate. In the 1960s we had riots and assassinations. In the 1940s we had World War II, Depression, World War I. By historic standards, we have problems, ISIS, Putin, wage stagnation, but they're not like, I don't think they're as big a problem as the Depression was or World War II was. So, if you put it in a historical perspective, you feel a little better.
One final question. I know you teach classes at Yale, so you've seen education from the inside. What's your view, trends, improvements, concerns?
The things I notice, and I visit a lot of colleges. I've probably visited 30 a year, and if I have a game with my friends whose children are applying to colleges. They pick a college and I tell them what it's like because I know them all. From Berry College, which is the largest college in America, it's in Georgia. It's the largest by land mass. That's a gigantic college. To Bellevue in Oklahoma, where I just was. I think the big trend that I've noticed over the last number of years is the globalization of the American university. I was up at the University of Buffalo, and 19% of the students are foreign-born. In my class, I teach a philosophy class. It's probably 30% foreign-born. I've got 2 Brazilians, I've got a couple Chinese, I've got a woman from Ghana. It's just everyone's from all over. And I think that's a great boon. I think there's a limit because we have to educate Americans, but it's a great boon. We're attracting great people, they add life to the campus. I think our university system is just doing amazingly well, actually. We all have things we would want to reform, but compared to, we have the best universities in the world, and nobody's even close. So I think supporting those universities, and also the other thing that's important to me is that the barrier between the ivory tower and the rest of the world is diminished. When I first started teaching, I never did a day of graduate school. I have no graduate experience. And the professors were really hostile to me. Now they're completely welcoming, and the students are hungry for practitioners who've been out in the world. And so I think the university is getting better in that respect. When a business leader can retire and come in and teach, give some real-world stories, I wouldn't want it to replace what the PhDs do, but it's a good supplement.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.